what's up, Spice Heads? Welcome back to another episode of On the Air. That's right, the show that's all about getting IT pros and tech vendors together to geek out over technology. As always, I'm your host, Justin Ong. We've got a great show for you guys coming up. We're going to be talking all about how to actually plan out a migration to AWS and modernize your infrastructure. And for more on this, we have a great panel of experts for y'all, including an IT pro from the Spiceworks community, as well as experts from Cloudreach and AWS. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off with a round of introductions. Coming to us first, he's a returning guest. We're excited to have him back. You guys know him in the community as B. Bigford. So everyone please give a warm welcome to Mr. Brandon Bigford. Brandon, how's it going today, man?
Doing well, thanks.
Brandon, thank you for joining us again. For those who have not met you in real life, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yep, I work for a managed service provider out in Boise, Idaho. We have a core business of supporting on-prem and cloud-native business models, helping customers align their financial and operational goals through either migration strategies with new and emerging technology or maintaining and being very flexible about what their needs are.
All right, very cool. Hence FlexText. There you go. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Brandon. We're excited to have you on. Our next guest is the first time appearing on this show. Please welcome from Cloudreach, Mr. Rob Whelan. Rob, how's it going today?
Great. Thanks, Justin.
Rob, thanks for joining us. And do you mind telling us about yourself and Cloudreach and what you guys do?
Yeah, Cloudreach is an AWS premier partner, and we know that the cloud journey is full of opportunities and challenges for both people and technology. So we elevate people and technology so you can reach new heights. I work as a solutions architect. I'm based here in Austin, and my focus is on data and security.
All right, well, wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us as well, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, coming to us from Amazon Web Services is Mr. Manu Durpande. Manu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks for having me.
Thanks. I'm glad you guys played along. Hope you guys had a good time. Manu, do you mind telling us a little about yourself and what you do for AWS?
Absolutely, yeah. My name is Manu Durpande, and I'm a senior solutions architect with AWS, and I specifically work for the AWS partner side of the business. And the primary goal that we operate on a daily basis is to help partners go to market with their customers, help build on AWS. And I specifically sit within the Microsoft Platforms team at AWS. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, and I've been with the company about a little over 5 years now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah.
Of course, what would On the Air be without you guys, the viewers? So for more on that, we're going to kick things over to our guest chat desk host this week, Ms. Erin Richards. Erin, welcome. How's it going?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Yes, I'm standing in for Chelsea. Chelsea's on vacation as she takes...
What do you think she's doing right now?
Scuba diving.
Scuba diving,
Climbing a
skydiving,
tree,
scuba diving.
skydiving,
Yeah.
diving off a diving board,
Yes.
some kind of diving. It sounds fun.
Something zany.
Yes, I'd love to do that too. Well, as always, I'll be your chat desk host. I'll be in chat. Make sure to get your questions into the queue. You know where it is. Press that send button so we can get those read live on the air. And again, if I read your question live on the air, you have some chance to win some swag. I think as David mentioned in chat, make sure to keep the pro in IT Pro when it comes to that chat. Please, thank you. Keep it classy, keep it cool. And I think you guys want to know what you're winning today.
Heck
hopefully.
yes.
Wonderful. All right, I am giving away 3 swag bags. Got a good old tote here to carry everything from a beach towel, I don't know, on drinks, what not have you. It comes with a nice little pop socket. These are pretty handy. I know I need these to keep my phone from cracking and shattering my screen on the ground. In addition, you got a water bottle in there. Keep things hot, keep things cold. In addition to that, we'll have 3 of those given away, and then 2 of you will be walking away with, or I guess digitaling walking away with 2 $10 Amazon gift cards, which is wonderful. And we've got 2 grand prize winners. Ugh, I can't. 2 grand prize winners today. You guys want to know what the big grand prize is?
Heck yes.
All right, it is a Fluke multimeter, clamp meter, and network cable tester. 2 of you guys are walking away with those. So get your questions in. I'll read them loud alive. I don't know what I'm saying. It's Friday. It's after Spice World. My brain's a little bit mush, but we're going to keep it going. All right. Back to you, Justin.
All right, thank you so much, Erin. Also, we'll be also discussing later on in the show a post that I made in the community talking about AWS best practices. So if Erin reads one of your best practices, you'll also be eligible for a $10 Amazon gift card. Erin, we just finished up Spice World. I'm exhausted. How about you?
I'm a little bit exhausted.
I'm excited to be here, though. How was your Spice World?
I had a great time.
Yeah.
I loved seeing all the big presentations. I loved Kate Darling with the robotics. That was
cool.
awesome. The one, my highlight, seeing you guys was always great. I talked to a lot of you, but I was also hunched over the praline bacon. Night one and Monday, just housing that, popping it in my pockets and
Pocket
having a
bacon,
great time.
yes.
How was your Spice World, Justin?
My Spice World was fantastic. Spice World, for me, I think in particular, is always really special. I not only get a chance to catch up with all the vendors that come through on the air, but most importantly, I also get a chance to hang out with a lot of our favorite chat folks in person. Took a bunch of pictures this year, as always, so I wanted to showcase some of them for you guys. So here is Edit, Aaron Doyle IT, as well as George Soul. Got to meet them both in person. I met Aaron last year. I met George and his enormous nephew for the first time, but also got to be there when they met each other in person. They're like, oh my God, you're Edit. Oh my God, you're George Soul. So that was really cool. Always great to see that chat family come together. Here is me and our good old buddy Dim Forrest taking our horses to the Old Town Road at the Spice World party. I think Dim especially had a great time at Spice World, so I can pretty much guarantee that he will be back at some point. And yeah, here's another one of my favorite pictures. It's Angie and R. Birch at the Spice World party. Angie and always wearing her unicorn tiara, and she looked fabulous. So always great to see them. And I know that she also had a great. Here she is with David and Matt and Bailey as well. At the Spice World party, which was a lot of good fun as well. So again, another great Spice World in the books. Excited for the next one and hope you all get to make it and I can see you guys in person as well. Of course, yes, just to put a cap on everything, like Aaron had mentioned, make sure you get those questions into chat or into the Q&A, which we'll be taking them later on in the show, as well as announcing the prizes of those winners, so do not go anywhere. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So. And one of the things that we're here today to talk about, I think a lot of folks that are in the audience today are not going to be cloud native. A lot of them are going to be coming from predominantly on premises, if not all on premises. And so it may be one of these things, I think for a lot of folks, where moving to AWS sounds great, but making the move, especially if things aren't necessarily broken, how do you necessarily make that decision? It's like when I was trying to move to Austin, I'd always wanted to move to Austin. I never made the choice until my wife finally got into grad school at UT, so that's how we finally made the leap. Manu, in your expert opinion and your experience, what are you guys finding as the main reasons why folks are ultimately making that decision to look into AWS? I've heard costs come up a lot, but I wanted to see if that was your experience as well.
Yeah, I can actually think of 5 different reasons, including cost, as the primary reasons that we have typically seen customers choose to go to AWS Cloud. The first one that comes to my mind is actually agility, right? AWS allows you to go, spin up instances and even hundreds or even thousands of instances instantly, right, within minutes. And when you can actually do that, you can go experiment, you can go, do things that you wouldn't be able to do it on-premises environment, right? So that's actually great for customers. And if an experiment fails, you can always go and deprovision all of these instances you spun up without having to deal with any risk of having purchased all of these, hardware that is now sitting in your on-premises data center. Close second is actually cost, right? If you look at customers that end up moving to the cloud, oftentimes the conversation starter ends up being cost, right? So, and AWS allows you to trade your, capital expenditure for variable expenses, and oftentimes the variable expenses that customers end up paying is much lower than what they could have done for themselves, right? So, and that's because of the economies of scale that AWS provides them, right? So that's the second reason. The third reason is actually elasticity, right? Customers are typically used to over-provisioning IT resources when they run on premises, so that they can actually go catch all of the peak traffic that that incurs based on their business operations. But when they run on AWS, they can actually scale out and scale up and scale down when they need to, in accordance with their business operations. So that's actually great, and that saves them a lot of money as well, while actually meeting their customers and markets' demands, right? And a fourth option, or the fourth reason, would be the ability to innovate faster, ability to go and quickly do things, right? So typically what ends up happening when you run on AWS is your highly valuable IT resources, they can actually go focus on things that actually differentiate their business within the market. That way they can actually not be focusing on the undifferentiated heavy lifting, which they would be doing, dealing with with infrastructure and data center equipment if they're running on premises. Last but not the least, the final reason would be the global footprint that they can actually get to run on top of AWS. We have a concept of regions where we have clusters of data center in a geographical location, and we logically group them into something called an availability zone. And customers get to choose from 69 different availability zones across 22 different geographical regions across the globe. So those are the top 5 reasons I think customers typically choose AWS. Yeah.
Okay. Rob, what about you? You guys work directly with the customers and help them plan out these migrations, and how much is cost always kind of the big component of it, or what are they looking for?
Cost can be a big component, and it can be a forcing function as well. Like, hey, my data center lease is expiring, I need to do something. But more often than not, we find that businesses that have any skin in the game around going fast in a digital manner, they need to go fast in the cloud, and they're going to go to the cloud for agility. So that kind of requires a paradigm shift from the business side to not look at IT as a cost center, but as a driver of innovation and value. So I think the cloud has kind of a strained relationship with cost. Sometimes you spend more, sometimes you spend less, but you have to look at it in terms of the total cost of ownership. Yes, I might be spending more in some areas, less in other areas, but I'm really getting this added value of agility and innovation.
And Brandon, what about you? If cost is a driver, like Rob had mentioned, it's not necessarily going to always save you money across the board. It really is going to depend on your use case and what you're looking to get out of it. For folks that are cost-minded, that are looking to move to the cloud, what do you feel like they need to be kind of keeping in mind or ask themselves?
So with a diverse set of customers, you might have one customer that has a very static workload, that's very predictable year after year, and you might have one that's very unpredictable. You might have a tax firm that has a peak season of 4 months and then it drops off substantially for the rest of the year. You might have some businesses that just need to operate from a specific hours of the day, and then they could spend those resources down during the night. When they go home at 5 o'clock and then they come back in at 8 o'clock. The total cost of ownership is something that can be pretty complex in a conversation. But when a customer starts talking about cost, we start looking at shifting that conversation more towards the value that the technology is bringing, and then we kind of bring in cost second to that. It's it's a big factor in the decision making because of their budget. But if a customer is starting to grow, they might be growing into maybe other countries, and they're from an internal perspective, they're not getting the same performance and the same results that they did when they were just maybe in one state of the U.S. Or maybe they're customer facing. They might require a different level of they might require a different experience from their customers, that maybe they're not quite as fast as they used to be as they were starting to scale, and they need to scale overnight. Twitter, if they go from 100 daily active users to 100 million daily active users, they can't. They might not want to, build out all of their infrastructure and build it out day one, what they want it to do in 10 years. They can just start consuming what they need today.
All right. And then so let's talk about how people actually get started. So, Brandon, are you finding that you have customers that look just, to move the entire Big Bang at once, or are they kind of looking at specific entry-level use cases, and if so, what are they?
It really depends on the customer. We do have several customers that look at, we've heard of the cloud. We don't want to have this huge capex. We don't want to have this huge capex cost. How do we push that out to the cloud? And then that's where costs and stuff can come into play. So for some customers, they do want to shift all of their workload to try to reduce their capex. But we have some other customers that they really need the the flexibility and the extensibility of the cloud, but that can be a little scary, just shifting your entire workload into the unknown for them. So within that consulting conversation, we typically will have a discussion of let's try out maybe just a little bit, just this application or this service, and then there's other customers that they see a proof of concept and they're like, let's do it.
Rob, I've often heard of backup being kind of one of the key gateway drugs, so to speak, for moving to the cloud. Is that what you guys are seeing, or what's in your experience kind of the first move that people make?
We've seen a mix. I mean, backup, I think, is a really sound way to use the cloud. And I'll give you an example. Hadoop is the original big data ecosystem on premise. And the thing with Hadoop, by default, it's going to replicate all of your static data 3 times. So if you got 100 gigabytes, you actually have 300 gigabytes. The cloud, you don't have to replicate it. So if you back up into the cloud, especially into S3, 11 nines of durability, it's already replicated within the region that Manu mentioned. You don't have to worry about it. So yes, backup is kind of the first step. But what we also see is people start saying, well, I've got my data in the cloud right now, and I've got this competitive pressure to move, and I've got business questions that I cannot answer right now because of my stack. I got to kind of upgrade my Hadoop distribution first, and it's kind of brittle. They're starting to use the tools in the cloud just because their data is there. So I think cloud kind of has a gravity to it. Get your data up there, get 1 or 2 apps up there. You find that it's a good experience, and you just continue moving.
Manu, what about you? What are you guys finding as the entry point for folks in a lot of cases?
Yeah, so while AWS is still a great place to put your backup, or you want to have a DR strategy, it is still a great place, right? And yes, it used to be the case maybe 7-8 years ago. A lot of customers thought of us moving to the AWS cloud. They would start off with a backup or a DR workload that they wanted to move to the cloud. But things have rapidly changed in the last 7-8 years now, and there's plenty of customers that actually dive head in, going all in on AWS. Like, for example, GoDaddy is a great example. Ryanair, Korean Air, Lyft, they're all great examples of deciding to go all in on AWS. But of course, once you make that decision, whether you make the decision to go all in, or you want to put a workload or 2 workloads, it's a journey that you actually take. There's planning to it, right? Crawl, walk, run. You're going to plan it out. You're going to test it. You're going to do a POC. You're going to start that journey somewhere, and that's what people like me can help customers and partners get started on AWS, and then make sure that they're doing things the right time, the first time itself, right? So that's typically how we are seeing customers start their cloud journey now.
So I think for a lot of customers, especially if they're going on-premise to the cloud, I mean, it's not always going to necessarily just be like, we're going to take exactly what we have on the cloud and just move into, there's going to be some level of modernization. Otherwise, what's the point? So let's take, for example, Windows Server 2008. It's going end of service. There's a lot of applications that maybe they've worked just fine. Maybe they've needed some improvement, but what is your experience on how these types of use cases ultimately end up in AWS, and what does that look like in the final state?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 parts to that question. I'll answer the first question, right? So the first question is, if you're still running on something like Windows 2008 Server, or maybe SQL Server 2008, it is almost a 10, 11-year-old platform now, right? So Microsoft typically has a life cycle where they support these products for first 5 years as a mainstream support, and then after 5 years they support it from a critical and important and patch management type strategy, right? So back in July, SQL Server 2008 actually went end of life, right? So if you're still running on it, you should actually have some sort of strategy to get away from that platform, because it's honestly very old, and now it's, you're looking at it migration or modernization from wearing your security lenses, right? If there's a 0-day vulnerability that hits you on this particular operating system, then your data is going to be at risk, right? So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, if you're looking at migrating, I think AWS is, again, a great place to have you move these workloads, right? So AWS has been supporting Windows operating system and SQL Server since 2008, right? So AWS has been doing it for over 11 years now, and there are some compelling reasons why customers should choose AWS as a potential cloud provider for running Microsoft Windows workloads. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 reasons here. The first one is, there is an IDC the analyst report out there from last year that nearly 60% of the Windows Server operating system environment in the public cloud space is actually on AWS. The next nearest competitor has about 31%. So there's a lot of customers that actually trust AWS, and they run their Windows operating system, Windows workloads on AWS. That's one compelling reason. A second reason I can think of is, again, there's a report, that was published by an analyst, which shows that AWS has nearly seven times more availability than the next competitor out there. So that's, again, availability is super important for most customers, no matter how big or how small you are. And AWS is a great place for you to run if you're looking at availability as one of the factors that, that is key to you and your applications and business, right? And the third reason, if I were to cite, is the AWS has unprecedented, right, depth of functionality and breadth of services, right? Once you get your applications into AWS platform, what can you do with that particular environment now? You can branch off. You can either keep it the same, upgrade it to a newer version of Windows environment, or you could potentially go Amazon Aurora, change your databases out, or you can potentially go do DynamoDB. There's a whole bunch of choices for you from that point on, and you already have moved your application there, so it's a lot easier for you as a customer to go look at some other technology, open source or otherwise, and then it's a lot easier, since your data is already there, it's a lot easier for you to port and migrate into newer open source and technologies out there.
Brandon, if you had a customer, I've got to move off 2008 because it's going end of service, I want to move to AWS, upgraded the operating system. What's your process? Can you give us an overview of your process of figuring out what it is that's going to maximize the value of all this investment of moving to the cloud, learning all this new technology, understanding, I guess let's start there. What was your approach kind of figuring out what that end solution is going to look like?
So if we take a customer that has a certain workload, it's existed, they've had 2008 for obviously a long time. So they have a kind of an expectation of what the workload has been doing, but what do they want it to do? It could be they might want to change their security perspective. They might want to change their performance as far as their internal operations, as well as their their customer facing. So when we start to have that conversation about what their future expectations are, then we can start to design their solution around that, and it might not be something where they just lift and shift just that operating system based workload. They might break it out into something completely different than it has existed for the last 5+ years.
And Rob, what about you? I mean, I think the application is obviously going to be key. Do you guys run into situations where the application that they were using isn't necessarily the best fit for moving to something like the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about Windows in particular, and basically a framework for deciding how you change your app when you go into the cloud. So Windows, if you're using 2008, at this point you've probably modified the operating system. You may have configured the kernel in some ways, but basically it can be sticky to try to move that app off. We've written a white paper around this topic that I've seen in the materials with this podcast to look at containerization. Containerization will isolate the operating system from the application. So it might help you to get around kind of the sticky parts of porting that app. Now, with any application, if you're on-premise and you're looking at AWS has a great framework they call the 6 R's. So for every application, you want to decide if you're going to retire it. I'm just going to get rid of it. Retain it. I'll keep it on-premise. Maybe it's too brittle to move. Going up the stack a little bit, I might rehost it. So that would be a lift and shift. Let's run it the exact same way on AWS, and that's a good option if you're under time pressure to get out of the data center. It's also a good way to get your feet wet. You might re-platform. So right now you're running SQL Server, and instead of running SQL Server on an EC2 instance where you manage all the configuration, you might actually use RDS, the relational database service that Amazon provides. And they manage the patching, the availability, multi-availability zone, replication, just kind of a tick of a button. So that would be a re-platform. Some applications you might just replace. I'm just going to buy something, some kind of SaaS. And finally, the most ambitious would be re-architecting. And that would be, right now I've got one app, it's got the web server and the application and the database on one virtual machine. But in the cloud, one part might be a serverless service running C#. Another part might be an EC2 instance running your app. And then the final tier could be an RDS deployment. So that would be re-architecting. So check out the 6 Rs as you're kind of going through your different apps.
And one last question before we go to our next segment, Manu. So Rob brought up a couple of different topics. I think a lot of folks in our audience are still relatively new to. So containerization, it's been around for a little while, but I think from an IT perspective, I think Brandon will back me up, it's still a little bit figuring out how that's going to fit into what we want to get. And then he also brings up serverless. That's another thing that I've heard in Twitter and in marketing materials and that kind of stuff. Can you give us a quick 101 kind of introduction to both of these concepts and kind of how they fit into the AWS?
Yeah. So I can certainly talk about serverless computing, right? So at AWS, when we refer to this term as serverless computing, we are often talking about services that, as a customer, you don't have to maintain, manage, or operate a server environment, right? So that is at its core serverless computing, right? So we have several services that actually fit into this serverless computing model, right? S3 is a great example, simple storage service, and it is a serverless, computing within the storage service ecosystem that AWS has. And the most popular one, a lot of customers and people have heard of, is the AWS Lambda, right? That came out maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and AWS Lambda, what it allows you to do is it's kind of like the holy grail for developers. You actually write code, and you don't have to do anything to actually go run your code on AWS. Write your code and go put your code on AWS Lambda, and Lambda will automatically run your code. And you can write your code in a whole bunch of different languages, like I'll name a few: Node.js, Java. You can write code in PowerShell now, right? So you can actually go write code in PowerShell, .NET code if you're a Microsoft programmer, right? So you can write that, and then essentially what Lambda allows you to do is AWS will run the runtime environment for you, and it'll execute the code, and you only pay for the time you're using AWS Lambda to execute your code. For example, if you write a bunch of code, and that code takes about 10 seconds to execute, you're only paying for that 10 seconds. So what it brought about a new paradigm shift in the world where you're actually not paying for idle time anymore.
Just
even
execution.
With right?
Yeah.
So even with AWS EC2, even if your CPU is, utilization is sitting at 1 or 2%, you're still paying for that EC2 instance. Whereas in Lambda, you don't have to pay for it. You go run your code, and once the code stops executing, you stop paying for it. So it's actually a very different way of looking at it from a cost standpoint, and a lot of customers are excited about it and they're using it. And when you put this serverless computing into a frame of migration or modernization, customers can choose to go, create a brand new application that runs entirely on Lambda. Or they can actually take an existing application, re-architect it, looks for bits and pieces within that application that'll be a good use case for running on Lambda. And that's a lot of customers are actually doing that. So when you do that, you're actually shifting your operational responsibilities back to AWS and having your IT staff focus on high-value tasks that'll actually differentiate your business in the market. So that's what's great about serverless computing.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we have been talking a lot about our best recommendations and advice for moving to AWS. But we also wanted to know what you guys in the SpiceWorks community had to say. So I posted a thread in the community asking what were the best advice and best practices that folks have for AWS migrations based on your experience. Aaron, let's kick it over to you and find out what they had to say.
Yes. So I've been going through the responses, and I wanted to go through 2 that really stood out. Mountain Biker said, before the party begins, get a good handle on what data will be going up to the cloud, identify where sensitive data resides, and establish best practices and procedures for everyone to follow. In addition, he said, sort out well in advance how sensitive data will be handled, leverage third-party tools, deep dive on privileges and roles, and keep humans in the mix to evaluate the overall architecture and periodically reassess to hunt out any inconsistencies, gaps, holes, or giant craters. What do you guys think about that?
I love it. I think it's a great point for a number of reasons. So at Cloudreach, we recognize that it's not just technology; it's also people. So I think he said, keep the humans in the mix. Humans are undergoing a change. When you look at the cloud, you're learning new skills, you're learning new processes. Decisions have to be made faster in the cloud than, say, on premise. So one best practice that AWS puts out that we follow is to create a cloud center of excellence. And this is a cross-functional team of 5 or 6 folks that would normally be siloed, but you put them on one team so you can make decisions faster. So it's finance, engineering, security, operations, leadership. Another point Mountain Biker made was around data security. So what's interesting about the cloud, I think slowly perception is changing. Originally it was, hey, the cloud, I can't see my data in the cloud, therefore it's not secure. Now that security has advanced so much in the cloud, so you mentioned Ryanair. Ryanair is all in on AWS. That stuff needs to be secure. Anyone who signs up for AWS today receives the same security treatment that Ryanair does. So that type of technological progress is available to you at a fraction of the cost. You can't get it on premise. So I think if you kind of look to the cloud and say, all right, they do things differently. They handle all the physical security. I don't have to hire guards or anything like that. But I do have to spend some time around roles and permissions. You'll find that it's much tighter in the cloud. So it's a really valuable experience to kind of cruise through there.
Manu or Brandon, you guys have anything?
Yeah, no, I want to touch on, AWS has this notion of shared responsibility model or shared security model. We often talk to customers about this shared responsibility model where, if you were to draw an imaginary line where, as a customer, your responsibility ends here, and as AWS, as your cloud provider, that's where AWS's responsibility starts. And this line kind of varies depending on what service you're using, right? For example, if you were to use something like AWS EC2, which is the virtual, quintessential virtual servers in the cloud, essentially AWS will take care of everything starting from the concrete all the way up to the hypervisor that you're running your operating system on, right? But once you install an operating system on top of this hypervisor, you as a customer is going to take responsibility for keeping that operating system secure, maintaining it, managing it, patching it. All of those things is on the customer's responsibility, right? So similarly, depending on what service you're using, this line's going to keep going up and up and up. Thereby, you're actually again shifting your operational responsibilities back to AWS in terms of maintaining and managing and those services. RDS, Relational Database Service, is a great example of that. Again, talking about shared responsibility model. If you were running something like Oracle or SQL Server or Postgres or MySQL database engines, Relational Database Service, again, is a great place to be on because you can essentially have AWS run this database engine, including the operating system, patch it for you at a time of your choosing, right? Take backups for you, even establish high availability for these instances. Thereby, again, you're shifting your operational focus, operational responsibilities, giving it to AWS. Thereby, they can do it for you, and you go focus on the things that you need to do for your business. So that's, again, it's important to understand that there is a shared responsibility model where you take responsibility for certain things and AWS does the other things.
Great. All right, Aaron, let's go to the next one.
Yes, our next response comes from Trent the Gent. For some reason, I want to say that in a British accent. Trent the Gent. It's terrible. His response, make a backup and verify that it is a good backup before you start. Then after you're done with the migration, verify that everything is there. My previous company did the opposite, and a lot of people were missing files and were not happy.
Brandon, you agree that that's good advice?
Yeah. Always check your backups. Sometimes they seem more important than the production data itself. So making sure that you have a proper plan in place. Without proper planning, you have no safety net. You just kind of go down a path, and as soon as you start to hit some speed bumps, you just kind of double down and just keep going. With proper planning, you need to have some communication within your team. You need to have a vetting process, and not processes to an extent where nothing gets done. You still need to make progress. But setting up those processes so that you are making the best educated decision on all of your migration strategies, and when you're starting to go through that, it might be not just as simple as just a huge lift and shift of your environment. The best method for some companies might be shifting just part of their workload. Anymore it hasn't seemed like just shifting just the lowest risk, maybe like QA has been, it doesn't seem like just shifting like QA has been, just a simple go-to. It might be something that, is it's part of your workload, but it's the most important, but it's just it's the component that needs to be shifted. But it's just properly planning it and having a contingency plan when things go poorly, instead of just having to throw your hands up and say, well, we lost data.
That's never fun. All right. I also understand we got a ton of questions coming in from the audience. So Aaron, what do folks want to know about?
There are some really good questions coming in, guys. Some tough ones. Be prepared. The first one, pretty good one for Manu. What are the benefits of AWS over other cloud providers?
Yeah, so there's a number of benefits that I can talk about in terms of benefits, right? So the first one I want to talk about is the global footprint, right? AWS has the biggest cloud player today in the market, and that's because we have regions that are spread across the globe, right? We have 22 of those, and those are pretty important for customers of any size, right? So you're starting out small, now you want to expand into a new region. You've got regions that you can actually go into, and the best part about the regions is all of these regions comprise of what we call as availability zones, right? These availability zones, think of them as like, isolated fault zones that you can put your, applications into, and essentially it's isolated from pretty much any fault that you can think of for a data center. The second point I want to talk about in terms of AWS advantages is essentially the 175 plus services, right? When you're trying to build any kind of service, either enterprise grade IT services or you're a small startup that is starting out and building out new applications, you need to have depth of functionality and breadth of services to be able to go build robust IT applications, and that's exactly what AWS really brings to bear in terms of feature-rich platform, right? And the third one I want to talk about is our CEO Andy Jassy often says security is job zero for us, right? So we essentially have a lot more services in terms of security-focused services than any other cloud player in the market right now. So that is also an important factor that everyone should consider when they are looking at their cloud provider, right? So I think those are the top three that I can think of at the moment.
Brandon, real quick, so you guys work with other different types of cloud providers. What do you feel like are AWS's relative strengths?
I feel like AWS has had they've had a hybrid approach since day one. Security in mind, flexibility, all the things that really make up a great cloud provider. So there might be other cloud providers where you can't do something that's critical to your organization. It might not be an open source function or a closed source function that that you need to make your app scalable, more agile, have more security, kind of a more security-driven focus around a particular deployment. In AWS, I mean, it still surprises me today how far ahead of some of the competitors that they are. There are a lot of other competitors that have been closing the gaps, but just the amount of control that you have without putting so much control that it feels like you have to be varsity league to really do anything. You can jump in day one. There's a lot of training courses on there to become more familiar with a lot of the products, and really just start coding, start delivering systems right out of the gate.
Cool. It's a great question. And who ended up asking that, Aaron?
That was B. Scott King.
B. Scott King. Oh, I met him at Special too.
Yeah.
All right, what are the questions we got?
Awesome. We've got one from Percussive Maintenance. What's going on? This one's for Rob. For cloud-based backup, the storage cost isn't that bad, but does Cloudreach help reduce the cost for data recovery?
For data recovery, like getting it back, I assume. Yeah, there are strategies for minimizing. So the question is around, okay, I've put my data in the cloud as a backup. Safe and sound there. Maybe it's an S3, which is the highest kind of response rate or the high speed to get your data back, all the way down to the slowest tier, which is called Glacier. It does take some strategy to minimize the cost to restore your data. So for example, if you have your data in cold storage, it's called Glacier, it's going to take a couple hours to get that data back. You are charged for every request, every GET request. So what you don't want to do is set up a system where, as part of an audit or some type of archive exercise, you have to request thousands and thousands of files every single month. What we've done in the past is, since just going into archive, performance isn't super important, we'll do what we can to put 1,000 files into one big file, compress it a bunch, put it into Glacier, and then when you pull it back out, it's much less expensive. So yes, there's strategies around it, which are really interesting, really fun to talk through.
All right. Cool. Let's get some more questions.
All right. This next one comes from Felix. Shout out to you. AWS has been gaining ground and earning trust over the past few years. In healthcare, patient data needs to assessed 24/7. I can't talk. Do you understand the question thus far?
Yeah.
Even during a hurricane. What are some options and recommendations for using AWS during emergency situations?
Oh, that's a great question. Who's got some advice?
Yeah, so yeah, we can talk about this, right? So if I understand the question, this particular customer has data sitting on premises that they want to move into AWS, or
it sounds like all right, I've got really important data I need to be able to access no matter what. It's already in AWS.
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of services that actually cater to just the data piece, right? So AWS S3 is the first one that comes to my mind, and it's one of the very first services that AWS started business with. Simple storage service, that's what it stands for. The durability numbers is off the charts for this particular service. It's actually designed to be durable at 11 nines. So that essentially means 99 followed by 9 nines, and that is a very, very high number for durability, and that's exactly what this customer is looking at. So once you put that data in, so that data is not going to go anywhere. That's durability, and of course, availability plays an important role too. Is your service actually up and running to be able to, for me to go access that? Again, S3 offers an SLA, and the availability is there as well. So there's a number of ways you can actually access this S3. You can put it in, and you can tear it down, like Rob mentioned, into Glacier, or you can keep it in S3 as hot data. You can pull data from S3 into a whole bunch of services. You can get it into CDN, and then you can get it into an application that is actually accessing it, or you can get it into EC2 and consume it into another application, or you can even use Lambda to actually go fetch some of this data from S3 and massage it and do something else and feed it into a different service. So yes, absolutely. And for healthcare data, there's a number of services that are actually HIPAA compatible. So you can actually work with those services. You can sign a BAA, what's called a business agreement that you sign with AWS for these services. So it's actually HIPAA compatible as well. So you can do that.
Let me add on to that. So I was in healthcare tech for a while, and so there's plenty of services that promise availability inside AWS. For actually getting it from AWS's data center to your computer, look at just straight over the internet, VPN or Direct Connect. And for VPN and Direct Connect, there's plenty of ways to sort of make those resilient. And also check out the HIPAA tier on AWS.
Oh, okay. Good to know. All right, let's keep on going, Mary.
All right, this next one comes from Michael, 7140 Hertz. With everything on the cloud and hearing more and more data breaches, how can we convince management that this is a secure option?
So,
Brandon, why don't you take that one?
Yeah. There's some interesting statistics out there about, not just the breaches, but also the investment side. I think Amazon now invests every year just in security something like $1.4 billion. 20%
of revenue.
Yeah. Wow. So I can't confidently say that any one of our customers invests over $1 billion just in security. One of the things behind some of these breaches and kind of the still trying to gain that trust is if you put everybody in a central vendor of sorts. In this case, just being AWS, and if everybody's on AWS, doesn't that make them a target? Well, if you consider ransomware, where if you're even on your own on-prem, it's just going out to the internet looking for exploits on open ports and a bunch of other things, variables going into that. So it's just kind of a sweeping. It's not necessarily somebody just targeting kind of a small organization. I've heard a lot of small organizations say, well, we don't really have that much important data like a huge company. Why would people target us? Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily targeting you. They're sweeping you. So by going on to AWS and going with a company that invests a substantial amount more money than any one of our customers could, you're going with a company that has 24/7 security operations centers and network operations centers, armed guards, multiple regions where you can specify where you want your data, so your HIPAA data isn't going outside of a certain geographic boundary that is required by compliance.
And just to add to that, right? So pretty much all the services that I can think of in terms of dealing with data on AWS is secure by default, right? And what I really mean by that is when a customer actually launches, let's say, an EC2 instance, is a virtual server, that is secure by default. So as a customer, you actually have to go explicitly do something to actually punch holes to allow traffic into that EC2 instance. Mm-hmm. So again, we have to talk about, this shared security, shared responsibility model where as a customer, you have certain responsibilities to keep your infrastructure, keep your data secure. And it's pretty clear in terms of what you need to do for each of these services. S3 buckets, again, they are secure by default. When you actually create an S3 bucket, that's actually completely locked down. You as a customer actually has to go do something to allow access into that particular bucket, right? So those are the things that I would point out in terms of making sure that you understand what service you're running and making sure that you have visibility into what are some of the services or what are some of the features this particular service has that I can potentially use to protect it, right? And in terms of looking at your AWS infrastructure as a whole, there's a number of services that allows you or gives you that visibility. CloudTrail is a great example. AWS Config again is a great example. All of these services allow you to, Config allows you to sit and record every single, configuration change that happens in your, AWS environment. CloudTrail is essentially think of it like breadcrumbs, right? Who did what, when did they do it, and what did the platform respond to in terms of what this particular user did. And every single click, every single API call that is made into this AWS platform is actually recorded, and you can actually go back and look back in time, or you can actually catch it live as it's happening. So I would focus on some of these security services that you can potentially, before you launch something into your AWS account, make sure you have all of these things enabled. AWS Config, AWS CloudTrail, GuardDuty is another great one, right? So it's going to sit there and it uses machine learning, artificial intelligence in the back, and it's essentially going to look at all the traffic that's hitting your AWS account and can give you intelligence into, hey, what's going on in terms of this EC2 instance has a security group open, and there is an IP address that's actually doing a brute force attack on your EC2 instance. So having all of these services enabled will give you the visibility that you never had in your operating, in your physical on-premises environment. So getting visibility, and then once you get that visibility, you use the tools and services that's available on AWS to go do something with that particular visibility, right? So that's my recommendation.
Rob, anything else that you would add as far as security?
I think Config, just check it out. It's probably the best, kind of little-known service. It's kind of like guardrails. Mm-hmm. So, and convincing management is it's not always easy, but telling them that Ryanair and Capital One are on AWS.
If it's good enough for them, it's probably good enough for us. All right, well, we're starting to run out of time, so we're going to kick it back over to Aaron one last time to find out who's walking away with some prizes.
Announce our swag winners. Y'all ready to hear who won?
Heck yes.
I am. All right. So for our tumbler, tote bag, and pop socket, we have B. Scott King, Felix, and Michael 7140
right.
HZ. Congratulations. And then for our community engagement post, I read 2 answers online. Those 2 responses came from Mountain Biker and Trent the Gent. You 2 are walking away with a $10 Amazon gift card. And we have 2 grand prize winners today that will be walking away with a Fluke 117 multimeter and network cable tester. Those 2 are Jay Clampert and Sam Smart 84. Congratulations. That's exciting. Get some good swag. All right, that's it. If you have announced your name online, please shoot us an email. Send us that you've won. Want some swag? And send us your information. We'll get back to you. We'll get it shipped to your way. So awesome. Throwing it back to you, Justin.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you so much for filling in today. I wanted to get real quick, any closing thoughts from each of you guys? Brandon, for folks that are watching today, any final advice that you got for them?
Yeah, 2 points that really stand out to me are the first one, when you're coming up with a deployment strategy, whether it's hybrid or lifting and shifting to the cloud, whatever your migration strategy might be, line out your strategy, and then to a certain extent, you really need to stick with that. You can be agile, as the project stretches on for maybe weeks or months or years, and start to shift with possibly shifting business needs. But as the market changes, all too often will I see a company that just wants to hit refresh. Mm-hmm. And every time you hit refresh, you have to completely start from scratch. It can be very costly. It can delay the project even further. And kind of on the other side of that coin is, if you're not making any decisions and you're kind of paralyzed with indecision, you need to make some progress. So really just coming up with a deployment method, continuing to go down that road, and mitigate some of the detours along the way as much as possible. The second thing is going to be, there's this somewhat of a notion, among a peer group that if you migrate your resources to the cloud or all of your compute, that it's just going to sort of jeopardize your job. Mm-hmm. If you're an on-prem, systems administrator or network administrator, it's really actually quite the opposite. As you start to shift your focus away from just the blinky lights on premises to focusing it more in the direction of what the business needs are, you're going to increase your value because you thereby are putting the business ahead of kind of your own professional scape. And so as you start to focus more along the lines of the business, you might develop, you will have to develop, other skills. You might become DevOps. You might become, you might have an interest in programming, or you might have, some other type of interest other than just replacing drives in a server or, physically racking networking equipment, stuff like that. So really just being open to the fact that you might be a lot more valuable than you currently are today.
Great. All right, Rob, any final words of wisdom from you?
Yeah. So from the business side, if you have any interest in competing and moving fast, you should really take a good hard look at the cloud and see IT as an innovation center, not as a cost center. Mm-hmm. So keep that in mind as your North Star as you go on this cloud journey. For the IT professional, it's a lot. Brandon can basically, you should take this as an opportunity to embrace learning new skills. There's so much to learn in the cloud. It's fun. It's fun as an engineer. So learn some new things. And if you want to do something really tangible, start with one application that has 3 tiers. So the web layer, the application server, and the database server. Try to split those up and put them on the cloud. That's a great project that you'll learn a ton from.
Cool. All right, and Manu, final words of wisdom from you.
Awesome. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Justin, for having me, and Brandon and Rob, thank you so much for being with me. So if you're a customer out there, you're evaluating cloud platforms, I think one of the better ways to evaluate, do your due diligence, is to do a quick and dirty POC on any application that you're considering moving to the cloud. We have seen a lot of success when customers start out doing a POC, and it actually gives you a much needed insight into, a deeper insight into your cloud platform to see if it'll actually work for you, right? So especially since there's so many cloud players in the market and you don't know which one is good, which one is bad, making that decision is hard, and it's getting harder. So I think POC is a great way to start your journey into whatever cloud that you're trying to go to.
Very cool. Well, thank all of you guys so much, Brandon, Rob, and Manu. Big thank you again for hanging out with us, and thank you to AWS for sponsoring today's event as well. We will be back here next week at Wednesday at our normal time. We've got another great show for you guys today, so make sure to check that out. We're going to be talking all about threat intelligence and security. So for more information about that episode and all things on the air, make sure to follow us in the Spiceworks community at community.spiceworks.com/ontheair. And until next time, guys, stay safe, keep it spicy. We will see you all back here next time. So long, guys.